All right, Assalamualaikum everyone, and welcome to tonight's session. We will be talking about arms, archery, armor, and archery of the Malay world. This will be a live discussion with Tengku Nara Paduka, founder and grandmaster of Seni Pedang Sukma Kencana, Nara Martial Arts Academy. My name is Anuar Matsaat of Eureka Archery and PERTAMA, and let's welcome Tengku Nara Paduka this evening. How are you? Salam hormat.
Salam hormat. How's everybody?
All right, great. So we first and foremost we apologize for the slight delay for the online discussion tonight, but we managed to rectify it, and thank you everyone for being very patient with us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so Pak Kunara, basically tonight we will be doing a discussion. So this discussion is more laid back. We're not going to go too much into the nitty-gritty details of citing where we get the resources and everything, because most things that we'll be sharing with you today is available online. So we encourage you to do your own research, and we also encourage you to challenge our ideas and propositions. This way we can all learn much better. Okay, so yep. Are we ready to start, Pak Kunara?
Yeah.
Okay. The topic of discussion for today, there will be 4 things that we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about arms, armor, and artillery of the Malay world. It is just a snapshot, because if we go too much in detail, we won't end until tomorrow. Next, we'll be talking about fighting style and equipments. Ultimately, the Jenawi Sukma, and finally, a topic that is quite popular recently, physical versus spiritual armor. So we'll start with the first topic, arms, armor, and artillery of the Malay world, a snapshot. To give us an idea, this is a map in the illustrations of Megat Panji Alam. When we define the Malay world, we're talking about the nations and the cultures that speak one language, which is Bahasa Melayu. So just to get things clear, our playing field for today, Pak Kunara, is the Malay world as seen through language and culture. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
All right, great. So for those of you who may not be able to read Jawi, if you're a Malay and you can't read Jawi, shame on you. You can learn from Pak Kunara on how to read Jawi. But for that, we also have the contemporary accounts in English for those of you who can't read Jawi. This is basically a map of the countries wherein the Malayo language is spoken. So it covers various nations, it covers various people across a vast amount of land and sea. So with that in mind, we would like to see the influence of the Malay world as seen in the map here, and the 15th century Malacca and its contemporaries. This way we understand on how the Malay world evolves and accept cultures from other regions within the vicinity and along the trade routes. And do you have any opinion on this, Pak Kunara?
Okay, when we talk about Malay work, it actually covers quite a large area of influence, which if you look at the map there, it can all be from Africa to the Pacific. And some even all the way to Japan, to Okinawa, and perhaps even the Russian peninsula. So when you say Malay, actually we're covering a very wide area. So for tonight, like you said, we will be focusing on the Malay-speaking area, which would be somewhere from the borders of Burma until the Philippines.
Okay, so since we have a basic understanding of the geographical location that we'll be talking about today, so this is done to basically to show the Malay culture, as a people, not any individual countries. So we hope we get that very clear among all of you. So if we show you something that comes from Indonesia or from southern Philippines, we're not claiming that it's Malaysian, we are claiming that it is of the Malay culture or the Malay world in general. So let's hope to get that disclaimer out and clear.
Yeah, we should really understand that when you say Malay, Malaysia is a new country. When we talk about Malay, we're talking about the people. So it covers a wider area.
That's right.
So I hope we can understand that for this purpose of the discussion tonight.
That's right. That's right. And I would like to also get your opinion on the idea of the trade routes first, as we have discussed earlier, but ultimately how it shapes the geography and the landscape of the Malay world, which is through the spread of the Islamic crescent. How does the religion actually bring forth culture, learning, education? Perhaps you can give some input on this, on the Islamic crescent's impact on the Malay world.
Okay, if you look at the map, you can see that Malacca is the center of the world, which means that people from around the world come to Malacca to trade. And this is not necessarily this is trade in terms of goods, but some of them come and they bring along their culture, even their religion. So when we talk about Islamic crescent, as you say, it is a very good point how to disseminate or how to spread the teachings of Islam throughout the entire Malay world. So actually Malacca played an important part through trade, not necessarily through warfare, because Islam was spread not necessarily by the sword. It was never spread by the sword. It was spread more by learning, by knowledge, and also by trade. Yeah.
So in essence, the Islamic crescent essentially enlightens a culture, and at the same time, it accelerates the adoption of knowledge and wellness in that sense.
Yes, it does, especially when the adoption of the Arabic script or the Jenawi script was, I think that was a unifying factor, because when the Malays started to use Jenawi, the entire Malay world practically used the Jenawi alphabet. Previously, we have Pahlavi, we have Sanskrit, we have the Javanese script, we have the Bugis script, we have like half a dozen different scripts. But the arrival of Islam to the Arabs and the Arabic script, the Jenawi, is actually a unifying factor that united the academic, so-called academic Malay world.
There is some comments on our YouTube stream that your voice is not very clear.
Not clear.
Yeah, not very clear.
I think do something.
So while Pak Kunara is adjusting the volume, I'll just read out some of the comments here so that we can address this in our Q&A session after this. Are you sounding better, Pak Kunara? Can you try to say a few words?
Okay, well, how's this?
Much better.
Is it better?
A lot better.
All right then.
So much clearer.
Good.
Okay, for you guys who are listening, can you inform us whether you're hearing this clearly? Any one of you who was watching? I know you're watching. There are 13 of you. Right, so one of the question was, tak ada ke pihak nak ambil balik sejarah kita di luar negara, artifak, undang-undang bertulis, meriam, sampai bila negara luar simpan khazanah negara kita. So for those of you who don't understand Malay, essentially Izon Said asked whether is there any initiatives to bring back our artifacts and basically our historical findings from abroad. As a general statement, a lot of our artifacts are actually being brought out of the country. So if you go to the museum, you may not see the full picture. It's not even the tip of the iceberg. So let's move on to our docket here. So everyone is commenting clear, much better, very clear. So thank you very much on that. So the Islamic crescent is basically what we believe is the accelerator of civilizations, as evident here as what Pak Kunara has mentioned earlier. The invention or the adoption of the Jawi script became the unifying factor over this region across multiple dialects and possibly multiple languages.
Yes.
So, Pak Kunara, this is an image, one of an early illustrations to depict Malacca in 1509. This is from a Portuguese source. Essentially, it's from the book called the Book of Duarte Barbosa. This is published in 1918. I would like to get your feedback, or rather your interpretation of the scenery that's depicted here.
Okay. When you look at this drawing, this picture, it actually contradicts what Malaysians in the Malaysian context, what Malaysian students have been taught about Malacca. I don't know about other countries, but in our own country, we've been told that Malacca was a small fort made of wood and people living in wooden houses. But the depiction here clearly shows that they had stone walls, they had tall buildings, and they had even elephants. So elephants back then were considered sort of a luxury item. Not just anybody can ride elephants. So the depiction here shows a rather metropolitan view of Malacca, not like the so-called small village idea that was planted into most people during school. So this is something that we should adapt to. I think we should change the view of what Malacca used to be into something that goes further down this line.
I would like to bring attention to there are some children here, which really shows how safe, even by the coast of Malacca.
Yes.
And not only that, the elephants, and if I notice, because I'm an archer personally, I love archery, every other person is holding a bow on their shoulders.
So that means archery was popular in Malacca back then.
I believe it was just a tool, just an everyday tool, like how we bring handphones everywhere nowadays. The bow is one of an essential tool.
Yeah.
I believe so. However, what we can see now is that in modern culture, this is how the Malay world is represented like. Strong, powerful, with powerful cannons, trying to ward off the inventions of a foreign fleet. However, this is not made by a Malaysian film company or any of the regions that speaks Malay, unfortunately. This scene is basically a still capture from the movie called Queens of Langkasuka. It was produced by a Thai film company, and their depiction of the Malay people, in my personal opinion, transcends anything that we have ever produced. That's my personal opinion. What do you think, Pak Kunara?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you because even our own production of epic Malay movies, for example, Puteri Gunung Ledang, I think that's the most contemporary epic that we have. Hardly shows Malacca as having, technological advancements like cannons and some of the warriors wearing armor. So this is a more, I would say, even though it is, there are a few missing or misconceptions about the scene, but generally this was what Malacca would have looked like when the Portuguese came in 1511.
And I'd like to comment a bit on this movie. I think because of the heavy Thai influence, you end up seeing a Malay, assumedly a Malay character, the Prince of Pahang, was actually wearing plate armor. Which came actually from the Thais, because the Thais has close relations with the West, and they actually incorporated plate armor. But Pahang and Thailand is quite far away, so
yeah.
So perhaps those are the. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, about that. Actually, during that time, or any other time, for that matter, in the Malay world, we did not wear solid plates. Okay, for the simple reason that it was too hot to be wearing a solid plate armor, and let alone standing there, but you have to fight in it. So solid plate is heavy, it is hot, it limits movement somewhat. So that's why if we look at say 19th or 18th century examples that still exist, they are mainly chainmail with small plates. So yeah, that was more practical for our region actually. And, I think the plate armor in the movie was that was a cinematic call. So just to make it look more, to make the Malays look stronger, to improve some sort of power. But in practicality, I think it was far from that.
And
In reality, it was far from that.
perhaps they would assume that because they feature the Malay people using arquebusiers, they're using the lela rentakas, they would assume the plate armor is supposed to withstand bullets, like the round ball bullets, like what the Japanese would use for their ashigarus.
Well, actually, plate armor, the decline of plate armor was due to firearms. So the invention of firearms and the widespread use of firearms, including smaller caliber muskets and pistols, was the reason that the knights ditched the armor and went for lighter protection. And actually they couldn't really defend against bullets back then. Some armors were thick enough to stop certain caliber bullets, but then you sacrifice the weight and the maneuverability for that.
Yeah, that is evidently very, very true. Because if let's say the Malay people did not adopt firearms that early, that means we will have more evidence of armor if they are still on Malay weapons. That would be a very... Sorry?
Yeah, that's true, and also the geographical factor, because we have paddy fields, we have oceans, rivers, so we have lots of bodies of water, which coincidentally do not work well with solid plate armor.
You become an anchor.
So unless you want to become an anchor.
Yep. Okay, let's look into the fighting style and equipments. We have already established the world that we're talking about, the people that we're talking about, the culture that we are focusing on. So here I have four very distinct images of the fighting style and the equipments used. The first picture is a picture of a battle between the Thais, where there's a depiction of elephant versus elephants. Like in the Western Front or in World War II, you have the tank versus tank battles. This one, you have the epic elephant versus elephants battle right here. Perhaps you want to comment a bit on the use of elephants in warfare?
Okay, back then elephants were practically the main battle tanks of the day. So elephants, they were used firstly to break up ranks, because practically they are practically unstoppable. And if you look at Indian kingdoms, their elephants were armored, so it's practically a walking tank, like in AT-AT in Star Wars, for example.
Bipedal tank.
So the AT-AT in Star Wars plays the same role as the elephants did 600 years ago. So elephant against elephant is practically tank against tank battle, and elephants could carry up to, I would say, 5 or 6 people on their backs in protective structures,
Mm-hmm.
and normally they would have archers in there with javelins as well. And I remember seeing somewhere there was an illustration of a small swivel gun mounted onto the elephant structure.
Mm-mm-mm. And they must have really trained these elephants not to get spooked easily, because elephants get spooked easily.
Yeah, yes. And it is interesting to note that one of the skills of the olden Malay people were to tame elephants.
Mm.
We had these what we call pawang gajah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we have the elephant whisperers here, native here.
Yes.
Mm-mm-mm-mm-mm.
So these people were so in touch with the elephant. They practically bonded with the elephants. They can command the elephants to do anything. You know, the elephants practically believed them or trusted them, and they would just obey the command of the elephant whisperer, so to say.
And I would believe that the Malay people have been using elephants even way before antiquities, because from what I understand, this particular warfare technique is can be found also evident in the Indian cultures, especially in the south.
Yes. And perhaps one of the reasons why the elephant was used rather than other animals, because first of all, it was the largest land animal that they can find. And secondly, it's mobile in practically any situation except maybe going uphill or maybe going across the sea. But other than that, you know, the elephant is sort of an ATV. You can go practically anywhere. And you can carry loads as well. So it was a practical solution for many things, for logistics even as well.
I mean, in this sense, it not only serves as a war machine, it also serves as a development machine as well, because the elephant was used to build the stockades, it was built to gather trunks and everything else. So it's more like a bulldozer, a multi-purpose vehicle.
Yes, it was like that. You know, the elephant was a sort of a multi-purpose vehicle that was used in peace to build, and as well in war for fighting, for battles.
And in regards to this, there was even some punishments in the ancient kingdoms where they used elephants to trample basically criminals. I think that shows how close the elephants is to the Malay people.
Yeah. And in this book, there was a note observation by the Portuguese that during the siege of, or rather the assault of Malacca, Battle of Malacca, some of the war elephants were mounted with long blades on their tusks. So that means rather than just to trample the enemy, they can also, you know, swing their heads from side to side and just practically cut into the enemy line.
So if we were to relate to this, it would be like a scene from Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Where the orcs are running everywhere and people are running from the elephants, and then one Malay archer would climb the elephant and shoot it down like Legolas. It could have happened. That's all I'm saying.
It could have happened. Anything is possible. Could have happened.
And then the second picture here is more similar to the Queens of Langkasuka scene, where there's a picture of a stockade. This was done by our local Malaysian artists, depicting the defenders bombarding the blockades of Portuguese ships. And I would like to put into focus here, this is a depiction of a typical Malay jong, which is huge and way bigger than whatever the Portuguese had when they came invading. And over here, I want to show what we discussed earlier on using solid plate armor. The Portuguese accounts have shown that this actually limits movement and restricts their landing on shore. That's why most of the time they're at sea, bombarding from afar.
Yep. You see, in the last depiction, you can clearly see that the Portuguese were depicted as wearing only chest plates, not the whole suit. So and some did not even wear helmets. So that means they wanted to reduce the weight of the armor so that they can come ashore more easily compared to being in full plate armor. If they had full harness on, I'm sure the moment they set foot on the beach, they're sunk.
That's right.
Typically sink into the water, and Malacca would just have to just stand there and wait. They'll all die of.
I think
they'll all drown in the sea.
But that's why I think if let's say the siege lasted a little bit longer, they will probably die of starvation or scurvy on the boats because they can't land.
Yes, that is a possibility as well, provided that the boats still float by then.
Okay, this is just a depiction. This is I derived this from Malacca Kini. This is a depiction based on the calculations of the mass and from the historical accounts of the Mendam Berahi, one of the biggest ships antiquities have ever seen. Perhaps you can share some insights on this one.
Okay, the Mendam Berahi was said to be, like you said, one of the biggest ships in antiquity. She was basically like an aircraft carrier of today in terms of size compared to other ships. And when you compare, I seem to remember a Dutch account when they wanted to attack Aceh. Okay, this was like 100 years after Malacca. They did not manage to get through because the Acehnese had ships that were taller than their masts. That means the Portuguese sails were, did not even reach the deck of the Aceh ships. So how were you supposed to even board those giants, those vipers? And it is said that the ship's walls were made of 4 layers of wood. And the Dutch cannons can only penetrate up to 2. So it was similar to what happened to the Yamato in World War II, I suppose.
It's a floating fortress in this sense.
It's a floating fortress in a sense, yes. So Mendam Berahi was that. It was a floating. She was a floating fortress. But one question comes to mind though. Where was Mendam Berahi during the Portuguese attack?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So shall we keep that question for another session then? Because again, that one will not stop. Because if we start down the road of naval warfare of the Malay world, we won't stop.
Yep. we can do another session on naval warfare next.
All right. So we have a few questions here that we would like to address first. First of all, do Malay have horse cavalry?
Yes, but the horse cavalry was mainly skirmish units. They just go in and come out, go in and come out. They are fast hit and run units. So they were not really the main force. The main force was the elephants. The elephants were the main battle tanks. So these guys were like armored personnel carriers, so to say, of the day. So they just they go in, wreak havoc, and come out. But they were available in limited numbers due to the, as I said again, the geographical factors of this area, because we didn't have like very wide fields where we can use lots of cavalry. We can do the cavalry charge. We couldn't really do that because of the limitations of the geography of the area. So that's why elephants were more important than horses. We did have horses. Not to say that we didn't have horses. We did have horses, but they were not the major part of the army, so to say.
It's more of a specialized unit, wouldn't it be?
Yes. So more of a specialized unit used for lightning fast attacks, hit and run tactics, horseback archery. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yeah.
And also um, warriors on horseback were those who used swords.
They will have a long-bladed weapon, spears, swords,
They would use
lances.
spears and swords, lances, bows and arrows. You
Mm.
couldn't really use a parang on horseback. No?
It doesn't make sense, does it?
Yeah.
Okay. That question just now was from Shadli Shan. And the next
Okay.
question would be from Muhammad Benjamin. War elephants served as main battle tank. Is there any support elements associated with the war elephants?
Support elements, I think I just mentioned the horses. And other than that, it's the artillery. So the artillery and then the infantry, of course. We didn't have armored infantry. Our infantry were mainly light infantry, armed with spears and shields. And maybe the commanders were the ones who were on the horses.
Or the elephants in this sense.
Or the elephants. I think there were horses as well in between that because, the commander needed to issue orders, so he had to be visible. If he was among his own men, then it's going to be a bit hard to do. So, it would have been possible for him to be on a horse so that he can issue orders easily.
Okay, understandable. I think it makes total sense that way. It's just logical thinking in that aspect, right? We do have a comment here. Is this guy even know about Malay naval warfare? Honestly, I don't. But this is a discussion topic where we welcome your input and your insights. If you have the knowledge and you have the references to cover, we will be glad to host you here and we can talk together and discuss together as a community. So I think that covers... Sorry, Pak Kunara, what was that?
Sure thing. I mean, we would really appreciate not just comments but also some input. If you were to say you have some knowledge on Malay naval warfare, then please, by all means, share it.
So we are open to criticism, requests, and whatever not. We are very positive here, and we're just here to discuss, and we're not here to lecture. So feel free. All right. So we'll last question here before we move on to the next segment, which is: could you explain about Malay battle formation from Muhammad Benjamin?
Malay battle formations. Okay. Referring to this again. From the Portuguese accounts. Okay, when you talk about battle formations, the only way that you could have a battle formation is for open warfare, right? So, in an open field, you can have a formation. But, as I've said before, this is not really possible in our area. So, due to the geographical factors, we have forests, we have jungles, we have rivers and swamps, paddy fields. So our battle tactics were slightly different from what we are used to seeing in Western depictions and also Western tactics. We did not have back then they had long lines of infantry and then the cavalry would charge in and then we didn't really have that. So the battle formation would have been units of guerrilla warfare, commandos. Okay, we would have small commando units that infiltrate the enemy lines, attack, and then return, attack and return. So that was the Malay style of combat. We didn't go in full force and then get stranded there. So in terms of formation, I would say we did not really have a proper formation as in the Western concept of battle formation. But if you're talking about battle units, yes, we did have organized military units. So practically every kampung is what's the equivalent of the military unit nowadays? It's a company. One kampung is one company. So the leader, the penghulu, is the leader of that company. So nowadays that would be the captain. So and several kampung come under one general, or the Guru Balang or the Panglima, and that's how it was. That was the structure. And this Panglima answer directly to the Laksmana, the general, the field marshal. So we had that, the command structure was there. Okay, but in terms of battle formation, the field formation, not so much.
So they have basically functions of units, but not essentially a physical layout like a chessboard in that kind of interpretation.
Yes.
This will also go ties very closely with the fighting styles and the equipments used. So essentially here, I have a few accounts. This is from Sumatra, from Indonesia. Again, another Malay world. And what is interesting for me to note here, on the left side, you see spears, you see some bladed weapons, you see a sling, and most importantly, you see a firearm.
Yep.
So in this connotation, we are trying. What I'm trying to put forth is, some of the people here in Malaysia ask, what is the Malay bow? How come we have no instances of the Malay people using bows and arrows? Well, my first initial response to that, a more of a general statement, is because the Malays adopted firearm much earlier than the rest of the world. The bow and arrow has become antiquity, whereas the firearm became the main weapon of choice in terms of range. And for this, I would also like to note that the Malay firearms has gone to a level that we have our own book on firearms that is written in Jawi text. And here we can see a much more recent image. It will be on the 18th or 1800 picture. If I'm not mistaken, this is from the Philippines, the southern Philippines.
Isn't that Aceh?
I'm not too sure. So I'm just trying to make sure here with you, just to confirm it.
The headgear looks Aceh to me. And also there's his sidearm, it looks like an Achenese weapon. Yep.
But what I noticed here that he's holding a buckler as well.
So the buckler would have been used. Okay, first of all, we need to understand that even though firearms offer longer range, their main drawback back then was the reload time. So these guys had to have a secondary weapon, and in this case, that looks like a Sikian. So a Sikian is basically an Aceh sword. Sikian would have been used once you fired a shot, and if you did not have time to reload, you just drop the rifle or drop the gun and draw out your sword. Basically, that's why the buckler is there. So that was used. That was the strategy. Unless you have time to reload, then the firearm would have been used again. So I have not really fired an antique firearms, but my friends who have done so told me that it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to reload.
Because you have to break open the powder, you have to slot it in, then you have to put the cloth in, ramp it up again. There's a lot of steps involved. But what I like to note here is that the Malay people have compiled these steps in this manuscript in a form of an artistic interpretation and recitation. So it becomes almost like a more of a poetry in a sense, an instructional poetry on just how to use the weapons of that time. And what I like to highlight here is that the ability of the Malay people to take something so mundane, such as a manual, this is essentially a user manual, and make it artistic. That gives us...
And,
Go ahead.
On another note, I recall this ancient text called the Peluru Petunang. Okay, Peluru Petunang is it's an ancient manuscript which emphasizes, among other things, on accuracy. So I think this is where the Malays make up for the slow rate of fire. They make sure that whenever they shoot, they will hit something. So that is why they had all these user manuals and all sorts of things, so that they wanted to make sure that when you shoot, you hit something. So when you hit something, that means that it affects the enemy. Then you have time to reload. So it's no point that you just shoot blindly. You cannot hit anything, and then the enemy keeps coming. When are you going to reload? So what's the point of having a firearm then?
So essentially, even the people of the Malays basically back then, they are aware of the triangle of power, accuracy, and speed. So in order to overcome speed issue, they make sure their accuracy is high and the power is high because their bedil is very big. So essentially, that shows even way before that, the Malay people are tactical minded. So it's not just a rambling band of amok monkeys just to give an understanding. So these are the kind of things that we can interpret from what little resources we have back on the Malay people or the Malay race in the Malay world. So can you imagine if we are able to acquire more heritage and more of these artifacts back, we can learn so much more.
Yes, indeed. It shows that the Malays were actually a very tactical people. They are not just like you said, rambling amok monkeys. No, we were very civilized. Okay? We were very advanced in our way, because you cannot compare the advancements in Malay culture to other cultures, because that would be like comparing, say, a cat to a fish. So the cat can run on land, the fish cannot walk on land, or the fish cannot climb a tree. So are you saying that the fish is
stupid?
Stupid, yeah. For what happens if you put the cat in the water?
So the argument has... go ahead.
To look at the to look at how to appreciate the culture, you have to look at the culture from within, from the culture side, not from an observation, from an outside observer's view. You have to go into the culture itself.
So here, basically, the perspective that you have to put forth is you have to dig deeper, because this is barely the tip.
Yes. This is just barely. It's not the tip. It's barely the tip.
It's barely the tip of the tip.
Yeah, it's the tip of the tip. There's a lot more to the blade than that.
Okay, so just now we will stop here. Basically, the items that was used. So this is from Sumatra. That shows the inner workings of the system that is used in the firearm. And over here, if I am not wrong, this could be a piston. Down here?
Piston.
A fire piston.
Yes. Looks like it.
So essentially, we are not people who use flints or wood to rub sticks together. We actually invented an entirely new invention, which is the fire piston, to make sure that these musketeers, so to speak, have an accessible fire source immediately, because it uses friction and vacuum to create ember. So I think that is the modern day lighter, and probably he would use this to light his rokok daun maybe as well. Because of course we are also affected by the tobacco trade through the trade routes.
Yeah.
Okay.
The rokok daun may have been used to light his musket as well.
Yeah, that could be true. That could be true. Okay. There are a few more questions, but we will hold that until we finish just the equipments, because we're just going to run through this. This is something more, I would say, closer to you.
Yeah.
Maybe you can share a bit on the role of this particular item.
Okay, I think by now everybody who's watching this would know that those are keris. Okay, so the keris is practically the Malay weapon. So whenever you see a keris, you do not associate it with any other race in the world but Malays. And looking at the various various types of keris that we have, that means, when a culture has so many designs on one particular weapon, that means they are a very advanced culture. They have, even for a keris, there are hundreds of different designs, and coming from different regions of the Malay world. And for a Malay to be without a keris is something odd. It was an oddity. But up to the, if I'm not mistaken, 16th or 17th century, not everybody was allowed to wear a keris. There was an edict by one of the Malacca sultans saying that only certain people were allowed to wear keris, because the keris back then was a badge of rank, and it was bestowed onto the person by the sultan. But we see towards the end of the 18th and in the 19th century, practically everybody wears a keris. So when Raffles came to essentially what they call Malaya back then, he noted that everybody from boys to old men all had keris on their belts. And after studying the keris for about 5 years in 1878, I think, towards the end of the 19th century, he decided to outlaw the wearing of the keris, because perhaps he found something important regarding the keris to the Malays. So he decided, okay, only the Sultan and 4 of his men can wear keris, no one else could.
Could that be an attempt to nullify the Malay culture in that sense, to distance the Malays from their heritage?
Yes. That was part of the idea. So from then onwards, we have been alienated by these people. We view the keris in a different manner. Some consider the keris as being evil, with spiritual or paranormal properties. And during Raffles' time, a lot of them got destroyed, thrown away, or taken away. And it was worse during Japanese occupation. Okay, during Japanese occupation, anybody found the keris was executed. So that's when our grandfathers practically buried or threw away their keris, which is a great loss to us today. Because I'm sure, even during the siege of Malacca, the Portuguese, the Dutch, they brought back an immense amount of keris. They took the best of what we had and took it back to their country, and which is hardly accessible nowadays to even our own people. And it's a shame, actually.
It's a very tragic incident, so to speak. And these are some illustrations of the keris. If I'm not mistaken, this is an account from Indonesia.
Yeah, it looks like it.
And perhaps this is something much closer to you, the Malay swords. Maybe you can enlighten some of our viewers on this particular diagram. It has been circulating in social media, so perhaps we can have a brief overview and snapshot of what this is all about.
Okay, this is actually my attempt at classifying Malay sword types. In European swords, we have one of the typologies that we have is the oak shot typology. So he divided the different shapes of the European sword into types, say 10, 11, 12, and so on. So what I try to emulate here is to differentiate or to classify the different types of Malay swords. So if you look there, you can see type 1A, 1B, and 1C. These are all they have the same type of hilt. Incidentally, when naming a Malay weapon, Malays tend to refer to the hilt as well. So a certain type of hilt refers to a certain type of weapon. And the combination of the hilt and the blade will determine what it is. So type 1 is basically what we call, on our side, we call it pedang makara because of the hilt. The hilt looks like a carving of a makara, ancient sea dragon, it was also the symbol of the Sriwijaya kingdom, symbol of maritime power. Okay, so if you look at type 1A, the blade tends to be, the tip of the blade goes down. Okay? And type 1B, tip of the blade goes up. Type 1C has a spear point. So actually, in Sumatra, they call these kelewang. Okay, these are called kelewang. The one with the tip going down is from Lombok. The one with the tip going up, that one is more of a northern to central to northern Sumatran region. And the one with the spear tip, that is actually taken from a Dutch or European saber blade mounted onto a makara hilt. So these are the different types of makara sword or kelewang. And then type 2 there is what we call the Jenawi. Jenawi is basically a two-handed sword, single-edged, with a long blade. Okay, the definition of sword here is that the blade needs to be at least 23 to 25 inches long. So anything shorter than that, we do not refer to it as a sword. But nowadays, anything looks like a sword, people call it sword. So this is what I'm trying to clarify. Not everything that looks like a sword is a sword. Okay, so type 2 is a Jenawi. Type 3, there's A and B there. 3 is what we call the penangkas. Okay, the penangkas is some call it a toa, which is a misnomer. It's not a toa. You see, a toa and pulwa and penangkas are 3 different types of swords. But they look similar. So the Malay type is the penangkas. They have become in either straight, double-edged, or slightly curved single-edged blades. So that's type 3 and 3A and B. And then we have type 4. 4A is what you call a typical, it's the buaya berenang.
Yeah, buaya berenang.
Yep, okay. There are 2 types of buaya berenang. There's a shorter version and a longer version. The longer version is what we call the pedang buaya berenang. Okay, that with this type 4A. And we have 4B, which is known as Pedang Melayu. Pedang Melayu does not have what we call the false edge of the helmet, the head of the crocodile at the end there. So it's just a straight blade, slightly curved usually. So that is the type 4B. Then the type 5 is what most people nowadays call a pedang. It's only got 21-inch blade. It's actually a short version of the buaya berenang. And some would call it parang panjang. Actually, the shorter versions should be called parang, not actually pedang. And then we have, that was type 5, type 6 is
Sikin.
Sikin,
Yeah.
Sikin, okay. Sikin is an Achinese sword. They also come in various types of blades. Some curved, most are straight, some are curved. Okay, then we go to type 6. We have type 7. I put in Nabo, but recently I found that they have a different name for it. Actually, Nabo is not accurate. We've been calling it Nabo because everybody calls it Nabo. So this is a type of sword from Banjarmasin. And then we have type 8. Type 8 is Alamein is a Buddhist sword. And then type 9. Type 9 is is what we call pedang belut. Pedang belut is basically, I have it here with me. This came from Pahang. Okay, it's a single-handed sword with a blade that is about an inch wide all